Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this cinematic sequence that was captured in HDR. And I just want to demystify a little bit this concept. I just want to make a short video about my settings and how I edit and outputted this video in HDR using DaVinci. Just to let you know, I'm using a Windows system. Probably Apple is kind of the same, but there are a few things that are different, so I'm not working with Apple products. I'm not really sure how you do it. First thing, I just want to talk about capturing the media. There is no such thing as HDR capturing in camera. Now, there will be cameras that will promise you an HDR mode. For example, DJI Osmo or different drones, they have something like this. Previous Sony cameras, they used to have a mode, and they still have it today, called hybrid low gamma or HDR. Previous Sony cameras, they were in 8-bit. I would not suggest anything less than 10-bit. So just be very careful at the nomenclature used, because some of them are simply marketing tools. They are not actually HDR captures. HDR means obviously high dynamic range, and everything that is brighter and has a wider color space, wider gamut than SDR can be considered HDR. But in order to capture that, you need a camera that can shoot log. Log is a flat gamma curve that is able to capture much more dynamic range than SDR. Log, usually for Sony cameras that I'm using, captures around 13 or 14 stops of light. Or you can capture in RAW. Now, there are cameras that can capture RAW, which is an altered image from the sensor. They can capture RAW inside, like RED cameras, ARRI cameras, some Nikon, some flavors of Canon. Blackmagic does that. If you do not have such a camera, you can always output to an external display, like external capture device like Ninja, Atomos Ninja. Those are very common, but again, you're going to get a flavor of RAW called ProRes RAW, and in order to do this, DaVinci Resolve unfortunately cannot process that. You have to go through Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere, but that workflow to output HDR will be slightly different than DaVinci. So for DaVinci, your best bet is to capture a log signal, and the low gamma curve that you capture needs to be in 10-bit, not 8-bit like previous Sony cameras used to do. They won't give you the best results. Again, unfortunately, even if you capture 10-bit, but it's SDR, it won't give you the best results when you deliver back in HDR, because of a limited dynamic range that you are acquiring. So stick with log, or as I said, RAW. Another thing that I want to clarify, you actually need two displays. Obviously, one of them, at least one of them, needs to be true HDR, and more than that, you need a hardware, which is a piece of equipment that you cannot download from the internet, and this is called a decklink card. It's made by Blackmagic, and unfortunately DaVinci only works with decklink card made by them. There are other companies like Matrox, Atrox, something like this. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but those are for very high-end television cinema work. For YouTube, I don't think it's needed. They are much more expensive, so you should stick with decklink. I have the absolute base model, which is decklink mini, I think it's called. You insert it in the PCI Express port of your motherboard, and it has an SDI and a HDMI output. I do not have an SDI display. I have an HDMI display, and I'm fine. Now, the output cannot be more than 4K 30p. So if you want to shoot in 50p or 60p, obviously you have to monitor in 1080. I don't see the problem with that, because you're just monitoring. It's not that you need to output. So I don't see why would you invest in much more in a card that is much more expensive. But then again, that is your problem. You will be thinking, why do I need this decklink card? Because the decklink card, it's a piece of device that can offer you a true and clean feed that is bypassing your operating system and your video card. Needless to say that your display also needs to be calibrated, but it's very difficult to calibrate HDR displays. Not all of them can do that. are able to do that, and you need a special device. Again, you need a hardware device that will calibrate the computer for you. Now my display, my HDR display, it's an Aorus FV43U, and the other display that the small one that I'm having in the vertical fashion it's a BenQ, which is like a pseudo HDR, but I don't mind because I'm watching my clean feed on the big display here, and this is the one that is the big display is actually the one connected to the decklink card. So just to summarize, you need to capture the signal in log or raw. You need two displays. One of them needs to be through HDR and needs to be connected to your computer through a decklink card. A decklink card again won't be able to boot Windows, so you still need a proper video card for that, and it's just there to give you a clean output and clean colors. I didn't see too much difference when I'm editing SDR content, but for HDR it's obviously night and day difference. Now you'll be thinking, how are you going to expose the log gamma curve for an HDR video? There is no such thing, there are no such rules. A camera and a gamma curve doesn't know your intention, doesn't know what you want to create, doesn't know even what you are pointing at. So obviously I'm shooting with Sony, for example. If you want to correctly expose S-log gamma curve, you have to expose middle gray at 41 IRE. Simple as that. There is absolutely no difference in workflow for SDR or HDR pathway. They are absolutely the same. You have to capture as much light as possible on the sensor, and to get the best of the dynamic range, you have to have it set in at IRE 41. How are you going to do that? There are multiple ways of doing it. You can use light meters, you can use gray card, you can use false colors, you can use zebras or waveform. That's another topic, obviously. Once you have imported your files into DaVinci, you can actually go into the first thing that you should do. You can actually go into the color management, and there will be different flavors like DaVinci YRGB, DaVinci YRGB color manage, or Access. I would suggest you to use DaVinci YRGB color manage, and it's very simple. If you click the automatic color management, you can choose obviously HDR as a color processing mode, and HDR PQ as output color space. You have to obviously click HDR mastering for 1000 nits. I would suggest to use 1000 nits, though today mobile phones, for example, can go easily to 2000. There are Dolby monitors that can go to 4000 nits, but those are very expensive, and I'm not sure that are even for sale. They are just for studio work, and you also have to remember that YouTube doesn't accept Dolby Vision, only Dolby Surround system, so it's a waste of time, and Dolby license also costs money, around 2000 USD per year. So forget about it. I'm just talking about the HDR10 workflow. There are multiple flavors of HDR, just stick with 10. There is another flavor called 10 Plus, which is proprietary to Samsung devices. I don't use it. And there is hybrid low gamma, which is a mixture between HDR and HDR, which is more used for broadcast. Again, I'm not talking about this. I'm just talking about HDR10. So this is what you're going to use. It's very simple. Now, if you want to dissect and you don't want to use an automatic color management, though this works absolutely fine, you can simply go here to custom, and here you're going to understand exactly what DaVinci is using. It's basically using a timeline working luminance of 1000, and an output color space is Rec 2100 ST 2084. That is all. I usually don't use this. I simply leave it on automatic. I simply leave it on HDR in HDR PQ, and I'm very happy with that. Now, when we are going to master settings, this is the most important area, which is called video monitoring, and those are the settings that you have to input, especially enable HDR metadata over the HDMI cable, otherwise you won't be able to see anything on your display connected to the deck link. What happens is, Here, obviously, those settings make sense only if you have a decklink card, simply because what people think that is the output, they are talking about this little window here. This is actually a graphic user interface or a video monitoring area, and this has nothing to do with the output. It's just the fact that a lot of people have only one computer and one display, so for them the graphic user interface of their non-linear editor or the viewfinder monitor area is similar to their only display that they have. But DaVinci doesn't refer that. When they are talking about video output, is actually the display connected to the decklink card. So that's something that you have to bear in mind. Now again, going into the properties, if you do not have such a display connected to a decklink card, there's no point making any alteration into the video monitoring area, because that will be absolutely no difference in what you are seeing. So here you're going to choose the video format. Obviously you can monitor in different resolutions, but I prefer to monitor in the native one. I do not have an HDR configuration, so it doesn't matter what am I choosing here. Data levels, I set them always to video full. My understanding is that it's simply just for in the case you are using Dolby, and video bit depth is 10-bit. Some people prefer to output in 12-bit. I don't see the benefit of that because I didn't record 12-bit, so I don't know if there is any benefit. Probably if you capture raw images, you should use 12. Otherwise, I would say to 10. And obviously, you have to enable HDR metadata, and then you simply save. Now, another thing that you can do is you go here into image scaling, and in the output scaling, you can measure the timeline settings, or as I was saying, if your video is in 50 or 60p, but you have a decklink card like me, a very basic one, you won't be able to monitor in 4K, 50 or 60, so then you have to drop the resolution to 1080. Now this video has been recorded in 4K, 25 frames per second, so everything is fine. And then you save, and you can obviously monitor. Now, as you can see, and I'm going to switch to this view now. As you can see, the image that appears on the small monitor, it's even if the settings are for HDR, the graphic user interface cannot show you a true HDR image. So because the color space and the gamma curve exceeds the capacity of the graphic user interface, the image will be very washed out and very desaturated. While what you are seeing on the HDR monitor connected to the decklink card, it's obviously a true HDR image, as good as your display can offer. Obviously, if you have a different display, much better, much brighter, you'll have much accurate, you'll have a slightly different image. But I'm saying that for what I do, this display satisfied me entirely. Now, further, when you monitor, you can go to the color page, and if you are using, for example, the waveform display like you should definitely go here in the sub menu, and you should check this option, HDR ST 2084, and then the waveform will be displayed from 0 to 10,000 nits. As you can see, an HDR image doesn't need always to go up to 1000 nits. Like for example, in this example, this is close to 700 or 800. You can clearly see it here on the FDR, and I don't know if I would ever be able to capture something even remotely close to 10,000 nits. I have, for example, this image, which is I'm shooting directly into the sun, and as you can see, there is a plateau at 1000 nits. Probably just because I set the time luminance to 1000, but I'm not interested to capture an image brighter than that. But you should still understand that 1000 nits is significantly brighter than an SDR image, and the dynamic range is also looks much more better, much more lifelike in HDR. Now, when we are talking about grading, again, this is something that unfortunately I do not do. I cannot calibrate my display in HDR, so I'm simply using the DaVinci power processing to do a correct mathematical conversion between S-Log and Rec 2020, and that's it. I do not alter brightness, I do not alter color or vibrance or saturation, because I try to get it right in the camera in terms that I'm trying to correctly expose the S-Log gamma curve. So all I have to do in post is to transform it in Rec 2020. Obviously, this is not an acceptable workflow for example, Hollywood. So I don't think I will ever be hired as an editor in Hollywood, but I don't mind. But for YouTube videos, this is plenty. It's enough, in my opinion. Now, once everything is said and done, you have to ultimately go and export your video, right? And again, here is very simple. You go to the delivery page, you give your video a name and a location, and in the format, I usually use QuickTime H265 encoder NVIDIA. Now, where is the most important thing in order for you to get an HDR tag is you have to choose main 10. If you do not choose main 10 and you choose main, it's not going to be HDR. You can choose probably 444. I don't mess with that. I'm just choosing main 10 because it's a smaller file. I'm restricting the file to 50,000 KB per S, and advanced settings, obviously color space and gamma tag will be same as project. There is no need to do any further alteration. Data levels, I leave it to auto, and then I export, and YouTube recognizes this file as HDR. Now there are other people who wants to export in ProRes 444 if you have a Mac computer, or you can choose DNX if you're on a Windows. Again, DNX MP, the files will be huge. Like you can get something like almost 100 gigabytes, and you have to understand that once you hand over the file to YouTube, they will recompress it, and there's no point, in my opinion, doing such a circus. Those formats are again for television or cinema. I believe it's a waste of time to do this for YouTube. I'm certainly not doing that. I'm very happy with H265 main 10. That gives reasonable smaller files, and the HDR tag is still there, so everything works as promised. Also, you have to remember that once you are uploading this video on a platform like YouTube, it will take time until the video will be possible to be viewed in HDR. It may take hours, so don't panic. I usually set it as a premiere, and because I want my viewers to see directly in HDR when they click the play button, rather than wait for video to be rendered or processed by that particular platform. I hope that helps, and I guess I'll see you in the next one.